και παρθένε, θεία του έξους αρκοθέντος, άδεις, ηχμαλώτιστε, οδάμανε και έκλειτε, η κατάρανε νεκρωτέ, η Εύα ελευθέρωτε, ο θάνατος τε θανάτωτε, και ημείς εζωπήθημεν, Θεό ανυμνούντες φοβάμεν, ευλογητός Χριστός.
To 11. Page 10. We're there? All right. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him, he said, "If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread." But he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him up into the holy city, set him on the pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He shall give his angels charge over you, and in their hands they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." Again the devil took him up on an exceedingly high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him. Now in this passage, we see how Christ triumphed over the devil, and Matthew gives us this model for how Christians, how we can do the same, how we can also triumph over the devil. But first, I would like to explain and have us understand the two meanings of tempt. The Greek word is peirázei. So the English word tempt, unfortunately, has a uniformly and consistently bad meaning. It always means to entice a man to do wrong, to seek to seduce him into sin, to try to persuade him to take the wrong way. But peirázei has a different element in its meaning. It means to test far more than it means to tempt. Just as metal has to be tested far beyond any stress and strain that it will ever be called to bear, before it can be put to any useful purpose, so a man needs to be tested before God can use him for his purpose. And this is an uplifting truth. What we call temptation is not meant to make us sin. It is meant to enable us to conquer sin. It isn't meant to make us bad. It isn't meant to make us good. It is not meant to weaken us, and it is not meant to make us emerge. It is meant to make us emerge stronger and finer, purer from the 5 by 15 miles between Jerusalem on the Central Plateau, the backbone of Palestine, and the Dead Sea. The Old Testament calls it Jeshimon, which means the devastation, and it's a much more fitting term. Sir George Adam Smith, a late 19th century historian, describes this place. It is an area of yellow sand, of crumbling limestone, and of scattered shingle. It is an area of control strata where the ridges run in all directions as if they were warped and twisted. The hills are like dust heaps. The limestone is blistered and peeling. Rocks are bare and jagged. Often the very ground sounds hollow when a foot or a horse's hoof falls upon it. It glows and shimmers with heat like some vast furnace. It runs right out to the Dead Sea, and then there comes a drop of 1,200 feet, a drop of limestone, flint, and marl, through crags and corries and precipices down to the Dead Sea. In other words, this is a desolate place. There's nothing there. And it is this wilderness where Christ must go, where he could be more alone than anywhere else in Palestine. He went into the wilderness to be alone. Sometimes we need to be alone to work things out in our minds, to have no distractions, but to allow us time and to allow us the opportunity to work things out on our own. So, God spoke to him. He must think of how he was to attempt the task which God had given him to do. He had to get things straightened out before he began, and he had to be alone to do this. These days in the wilderness were preparation for Christ. He was seeking the will of the Father for his future ministry. As Moses communed with God on Mount Horeb for 40 days, we find this in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 9, verse 9, and not for his own use, and to let his appetite set the agenda for him. And that's exactly what Christ did not want to do. Christ responds, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds through the mouth of God." He quotes Deuteronomy 8, chapter 8, verse 13. In the same way, Christ clings to the will of God in his commandments and his sole reference point. The commandments are his sole reference point. The scripture is what Christ recites and what cannot be waived or misconstrued as the devil tries to make it. Christ will not eat out of obedience from his bodily hunger and his bodily desires, but he will only eat if he is instructed by God. We all endure this temptation, and that's the temptation for our passions to rule over us and our desires more than the will of God to work through us. The second temptation, the devil says, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will give his angels charge of you, and on the other hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." This temptation is simply when the devil takes Christ to the pinnacle of the temple and he says to him, "Throw yourself off this cliff." And because he spared that affliction, one should not try to make God prove himself. Rather, one should trust that God will direct our paths because he knows best, and not to presume on his unconditional protection. By doing so, Christ calls us to also walk with God by faith and to take whatever comes from the Father's hand, confident that God's love knows what is best for us. We must not seek to bend God's will to our own. And that's what the devil was trying to do in this instance. Now, the third test. The devil says, "It is written." The devil took him up to a high mountain. Now he goes to a high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said, "All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Fall down and worship me. The devil wants Christ to bow down to him. So we see the devil would give Christ all the kingdoms of the world in their glory, since the source is Christ himself. In other words, how did we receive this story? How was Matthew able to write it down? It was Christ. One can assume, we have to assume, it was Christ after his trials in the wilderness. explained it, and shared it with his disciples. Therefore, Christ is the source of this passage, this triumph over Satan. But we know no one was with him because, as I said, the wilderness, no one was there. There was nothing there. Christ specifically went out to be alone, to be by himself. We know of it only because it had to be Christ, as I said, who told his disciples. In other words, it is Christ telling us his spiritual autobiography. Finally, when we approach this reading, one must approach it with special reverence, for in it Christ is laying bare his innermost heart and soul. He is telling us his struggles. He is saying to us that he can help others who are tempted